proud. This is the barn, Sawyer house, which is it's a barn. Home to the Bolton Historical Society. So there are many people that we want to thank, but I just want to point out a few special ones. And thanks goes out to Freedom's Way, especially for our participation in their Patriots Path program that under the expert guidance of Mary Fuhrer, which basically created this program. Much thanks to our cast for taking the time out of their busy schedules to be here today. And special thanks is to Ava Martin. So Ava, because she saw the potential here and she made it into a reality. So Ava contacted us in September. She's in her gap year, interested in helping at the at Sawyer House, and so she's been interning with us for a year. And sort of as an extra perk was we also got to meet her wonderful family. So thank you. So this play is about ordinary people living during extraordinary times. Unfortunately, one individual we had to leave out because we weren't able to find an actor to play her part. Her name was Prudence, and she was the Negro girl belonging to the Reverend Thomas Goss. We know this because Goss's will, dated June 7, 1780, states, "I give and bequeath to Abigail, my dearly beloved wife, and heirs forever, Prudence, my Negro girl, and all my indoor valuables, and my horse and chaise." In his probate inventory, Prudence is listed as Negro girl, £1,000, right after the household items and before the livestock. She was valued at £500 less than a yoke of oxen. Prudence's voice in the play would have questioned what the struggle for freedom meant for her, and criticized the comfortable lifestyle of her master and his son, Thomas Goss Jr. It is, in the end, Prudence recognizes that the revolution brought no change to her life at first, but in 1783 saw the end of slavery in Massachusetts. But without a master, without property, she disappears from history. And so without further ado, Bolton's Road to Revolution.
In 1763, no people were more proud to be Briton than the country folk of Massachusetts. The British are victors in the French and Indian War, a war which many Bolton men fought. Now they were part of the world's greatest empire. They could claim all the prized liberties of English subjects. What good fortune to be British.
But a dozen years later, they were at war again. Only now they were Americans and their enemy was the British.
How could this possibly happen? This is quite a change indeed. There were many steps on the path from friend to foe. For years before any shots were fired, tension brewed between the mother nation and her colonies. It all started in deterioration. It all started to deteriorate when British decided that the colony should help pay for all the debt the French and Indian War caused.
Exactly. That decision might have been fine on its own, but Britain's big mistake was neglecting to ask the colonies for their input before they acted. And that, I will tell you, did not resonate well with the independence-loving colonists. Over the next decade, Massachusetts towns, including Bolton, met together, voiced their frustrations, asserted their rights, and then planned resistance. This is the story of Bolton's path to revolution.
And it is told in the voices of real people from Bolton, often in their own words, as recorded in Bolton's own records. Here are some of them now.
A good day to you. I am Jonathan Whitcomb. The eldest son of Colonel John Whitcomb. I am a youth of 15 in 1765. I work on my father's large farm and in his lime quarry. My father is an experienced soldier, a squire, and one of the most respected and prosperous men in town. Yet he is a simple, straightforward man with no airs and no patience for those who adopt superior attitudes.
I am Martha Stearns. Also 15 in 1765 when the Troubles began. My father, Benjamin, was a cordwainer, always making a new pair of shoes. And he also had a large farm before he died. He had high aspirations for my two older brothers, for they had fine educations. Now they have become aristocratic literary men. Unfortunately, they have adopted English Tory attitudes. There's no doubt in my mind that I am coming of age in a very interesting time.
My name is Abraham Holman. I'm a farmer and sometime tavern keeper with a growing family. I fought in the French-Indian War under my friend Whitcomb, a man who I greatly respect. Now it seems that the colonel has faced a new foe. Should I follow his lead?
My name is Thomas Goss Jr. I am the firstborn and namesake of the chosen Reverend, the first minister, Thomas Goss. Thomas Goss, my father, was a local man from Brookfield and educated at Harvard. I grew up in the grandest house in town, the big house, the Georgian house on Main Street. I received a fine education, like my father. As a gentleman and a man of property, I expect to be treated with deference and respect. To my horror, these townsfolk are questioning the authority of my father, their reverend, selected by them and endowed with the task of leading and directing them. Even worse, some of these townsfolk are listening to the radicals in Boston and refuse or are questioning their submission to the God-given rights of their king. This is only going to lead to calamity and disorder, and this is insubordination.
My name is Anna Greenleaf, and I am the English-born wife of Dr. Daniel Greenleaf, Jr. My husband studied medicine under his father and then traveled to England to complete his education. There we met. I was a widow with a young daughter. After we married, we returned to my husband's hometown just as the Troubles began, but I did not find a warm welcome here. Despite our comfortable home and large farm, I increasingly feel a difference. I am British, and these people are becoming Americans.
Trouble began in the fall of 1765. Britain needed to raise money to pay for their recent war, so the British Parliament ordered that all printed material bear a tax stamp. This Stamp Act, as it was named, was fiercely resisted. Colonists declared it violated their ancient rights to have a say in any taxation. In Boston, mobs rioted. No taxation without representation.
Down in Braintree, Massachusetts, John Adams eloquently laid out colonial grievances. More than 40 other towns followed suit complaining of the irregard for their British rights. The town of Bolton had its share of men who resisted this taxation, but its minister preached that the people must defer and submit to their betters. And so, on the Stamp Act, Bolton was silent.
When the audacious Stamp Act was lifted in the spring of 1766, many Massachusetts towns rejoiced.
However, some conservative men wondered, should the public perhaps repay Crown officials for the property damage they had suffered in the Stamp Act riots?
Well, I certainly was gratified to hear that some Bolton men had made good the damages which sundry persons in the town of Boston received in the late disturbances by the mob. The townsfolk should make amends to Crown officials for last summer's riots, but I rejoiced too soon. On August 12, 1766, town meeting reconsidered and reversed their vote. It appears there is another faction keen to promote colonial liberties over Crown prerogative. Let us hope Parliament abandons this vexing issue of taxing the colonies. If they do not, I fear there will be trouble.
Anna Greenleaf's wish did not come true. Within a year, Parliament tried again. Perhaps they thought the colonies would pay taxes on different goods. In the Townshend Acts, duties were levied on many imported items, including paper, paint, lead, glass, and tea. Most people back then used these things, and frequently.
And they weren't about to pay extra for them without having a say in the matter. That was the key, really. Remember, no taxation without representation? So in the city of Boston, the people expressed their outrage. At their town meeting, they signed an agreement to boycott these items and to encourage home manufacture in their stead.
Order, sirs. Gentlemen, we have before us today important matters upon which to decide. The matters of business before us are, first, to see what method the town will come into towards encouraging industry, frugality, and our own manufactures, and second, to return an answer to the selectmen of Boston relating to the votes of the town of Boston, which they communicated to us.
Boston shall not sacrifice alone. We are with them.
By on Parliament.
Hear, hear.
Sirs, then hear what Colonel Whitcomb has counseled should be our response. The town, taking into consideration a letter from the gentlemen selectmen of Boston, and considering the public spirit that appears therein by the inhabitants of Boston, denying themselves their present and personal profits for the public good, the inhabitants of the town of Bolton do most heartily concur with them in said proposal.
Aye!
Aye!
Yes.
The vote is unanimous.
Huzzah!
Huzzah!
Shouldn't the minister have the right to veto any vote of this town? These goods are needed. A boycott of all these goods is ridiculous. And what's worse is these people are using my father's leading house to spread these seditious, improper opinions of those in Boston. This should not be allowed.
Come on, Gus, just sit down.
Sit down, guys.
A few months later, in February 1768, Samuel Adams and James Otis Jr. of Boston went further. They composed what became known as the Circular Letter, advocating even more drastic changes in the imported goods. They proposed that the colonists replace the imports with more local and homemade goods. Boston circulated this proposal to the towns and to the other colonies. Massachusetts towns, large and small, met to consider and respond.
Martha, my husband has told me of the proceedings of the town meeting one night past. March 2nd, 1768 will be remembered. Our men met to see what measures the town will come into for promoting industry and manufacturing among its inhabitants.
What was agreed upon?
It was voted that we reserve all our rags for use in the local paper mills. so that we not be dependent upon imported paper. I know not whether it is for good or ill.
This will be woman's work, and though my brothers may not approve of such an action, I will save my rags to support our liberty.
The Crown was outraged by the town boycotts. The King's ministers ordered the Massachusetts legislature to renounce these attempts and to resist, but the legislature refused.
My father was Bolton's representative to the Massachusetts legislature, and he was one of the glorious 92, those brave men who stood up to the royal governor and refused to rescind the circular letter. Toasts are being made in honor of the glorious 92, and I have heard that patriot and silversmith Paul Revere has cast a bowl with the names of all 92 non-rescinders engraved upon it, my father included.
But the royal governor did not find these non-rescinders glorious. He was infuriated. In response, he dissolved the legislature.
The action sent shockwaves through the countryside. Many saw this as yet another dangerous infringement on their rights.
Even more frightening, British troops arrived to be quartered in troublesome Boston. The countryside was not silent. Many protested this dismissal of their assembly and the arrival of the British troops. Back in Boston, the governor forbade the legislature to meet.
But Boston ignored the order. Instead, it sent out a letter to all the towns detailing their grievances and calling on them to elect representatives to their own convention.
This was a bold innovation. The assembly was not legal. Those who went as delegates might be tried for treason. 100 of the colony's 250 towns defiantly voted to send a representative anyway.
What an honor for the colonel to be chosen on behalf of the town as our delegate to the convention.
May God help my father to speak as he should.
As you are aware, we fully trust his opinion, and I am sure his words will please us in Bolton.
I wish him luck pleasing the young goss. What a Tory if I ever saw him.
Regardless, the position is one of great risk, and we are thankful to him for his willingness to go.
Great risk indeed. You are a vile nest of serpents, usurping my father's clerical authority. When one issues treasonous statements, you should be aware of your safety in question.
Goss, you know my father is not a man inclined to defer to anyone based on wealth and title. No, sir. Those who want his loyalty and respect must earn it with their actions.
Actions? For long years and centuries, the titled and the educated have had perfectly good experience directing the affairs of the common folk.
The delegates who attended the convention met for a week, but the petitions they drafted to the governor and the king were scoffed at.
Boston's patriots now urge the towns to swear that we will not send for or import any kind of goods or merchandise from Great Britain from January 1st, 1769 to January 1st, 1770. Some towns ignored this. Some mildly called to increase frugality.
Others wholeheartedly embraced the boycott. Those who supported the boycott circulated covenants for their townsmen to sign. Non-signers were treated as an enemy of the people.
My brothers have instructed me in the latest news. At town meeting, May 23rd, 1769, our town chose a committee to give instructions to our representative, Colonel Whitcomb, regarding importing goods. Their instructions were approved unanimously. I am preparing to be married, and though I would like to assemble some fine goods, such as my brothers have for my new home, my husband-to-be, Simon Houghton, is a patriotic man. And so I will forego imported cloth, china, teawares, and settle for locally made goods.
Tensions mounted in Boston. The King's troops were in constant friction with the locals. On March 5th, 1770, a mob turned violent.
British troops fired on the crowd, killing 5 in what has become known as the Boston Massacre. Drawing back from the brink of outright war, the British ministry agreed to withdraw their troops.
The Crown also agreed to remove taxes from some of the imported goods, but Boston's patriots were not mollified. They called for the towns to adopt complete non-consumption of British imported goods. Bolton spoke its mind.
I am dismayed at the tenor of the times. Hear what men of Bolton have declared May 21st, 1770. That we highly approve of the conduct of the merchants of the town of Boston respecting the non-importation of British goods, and that we will none of us, on any pretense whatsoever, purchase one single article of any merchant or trader that has imported goods, and that we shall esteem such purchasers as enemies to this country, and that we shall abstain from the use of all foreign teas ourselves, and that we will not suffer it to be used in our families until the whole of the late revenue acts are repealed, and that we will use our utmost endeavors to promote industry and frugality and our own manufacture amongst ourselves, as judging it the most likely means to save our country from slavery and to secure a lasting inheritance to our prosperity. Is my home country then to be considered the enemy? Am I?
1771 was an unhappy year for the town of Bolton. A disagreement that had long been simmering between the minister and some of his flock broke out into the open. Reverend Goss was a man of the old school, educated and aristocratic. He expected his people to defer to his authority.
But in the rebellious atmosphere of the time, some people of Bolton, particularly the plain-spoken but respected Colonel Whitcomb, resisted. So we find ourselves back at the meeting house.
His manner is an insult, utterly overbearing.
Immoral habits.
His views on deference to authority are antiquated and absurd.
Aye.
Gentlemen, these opinions have all been expressed during this past month. Have we come to a vote to decide upon?
It has been suggested that whereas Mr. Goss has caused a drift in the church, and by maladministration and breach of covenants has caused his town in a deplorable circumstances, and therefore he should forfeit all right to claim of the seat, of the bench, and of the table of a teacher.
Aye. Aye.
The vote is unanimous. On this day, August 13, 1771, we have dismissed Mr. Goss from all parts of his ministries amongst us.
This is an outrage. You uneducated men have no right to dismiss anyone who has more education than you.
The challenge to their minister's authority continued to distract the people of Bolton. The faction opposed to him forcibly barred him from entering the pulpit. Reverend Goss sued the town for his salary.
A council of ministers from other towns in the nearby area urged the people of Bolton to forgive and take back their minister. But Bolton rejected this authority as well. The farmers of Bolton would no longer defer to those of learning and manners or wealth. They had begun to define and defend the rights and liberties to all men.
On this day, July 15, 1773, my father was chosen one of 5 men to form a committee of correspondence to join with the committee of correspondence of the town of Boston.
A town meeting was called in Boston to protest these new measures. Bostonians wrote an address to the governor expressing their concerns. They appealed to towns to support. At Bolton's town meeting, September 28, 1772, the men met to see if the town will act on anything in the letter that hath been sent from the town of Boston respecting an infringement of some part of our civil rights and privileges. Voted that the infractions on the rights and liberties of the people of this province, as specified by the letter from the committee of the town of Boston, are great grievances and call for speedy redress, and further voted, a representative will be directed to use his best endeavors towards constitutionally addressing the same. The legislature presented an address with an appeal to redress grievances, but the governor refused to hear it.
The colonists would not be silent. Samuel Adams wrote a pamphlet recording Boston's resolves and sent it to all the towns. The pamphlet called on each town to meet and assert the people's rights. It also called for each town to form a committee of correspondence.
These committees would share news of dangers and cooperate in defense. The pamphlet requested each town to respond in writing.
On this day, July 15th, 1773, my father was chosen one of 5 men to form a committee of correspondence, to correspond with the Committee of Correspondence of the Town of Boston.
1773 turned out to be an anxious and angry year. In May, Parliament passed the Tea Act. On December 16, 1773, colonists disguised as Indians dumped tea from 3 ships into Boston Harbor. Parliament was not amused. They responded in the spring of 1774 with harsh measures, the Intolerable Acts. They closed the port of Boston. They quartered troops in private homes. Most alarming, they banned town meetings, stripping the towns of self-government.
The Boston Committee of Correspondence immediately wrote to all the towns soliciting their advice and support. Bolton Town Meeting responded with the defense of their rights and liberties, and then resolved,
on this 21st day of March 1774, we declare ourselves on the liberty side in these questions. First, laws may be made are binding on His Majesty's subject here, but not when laws are framed by the British Parliament where we have no representation. Secondly, that in order to counteract the British Act respecting the duty on tea to be paid here, we will not taste of this politically forbidden fruit and any consideration whatever whilst it remains under its circumstance of taxation. Thirdly, that any person purchasing and bringing any of said commodity into this town with an intent to use or vend here shall be deemed inimical to the rights and liberties of America and shall be excluded from all the honors and favors that is in the power of this town to bestow.
By late summer of 1774, the towns were afire with resistance. Many signed covenants pledging complete non-consumption of any British goods, and nasty consequences for those who did not comply. Bolton, on July 4th, resolved that it is the mind of this town that they will not purchase any goods imported from Great Britain, excepting medical drugs, and from here and after the 31st of August next. In the autumn of 1774, rumors abounded of starving people in Boston, British troops on the march, and the collapse of Brown's authority. Boston issued a call for a Massachusetts Convention of Town Representatives to set up a new provincial government, independent of the Crown. About 90 towns responded, sending representatives to Congress in early October.
Well, I am pleased that we have chosen Captain Samuel Baker as our representative to the General Court.
I doubt this court of the king will ever meet. The town of Boston is infested with troops and ships of war. The king's authority does not hold.
Then we shall follow the decision of town meeting. Captain Baker and Mr. Ephraim Fairbanks shall immediately repair to the town of Concord, where they shall join the provincial congress to act and measure to whatever they shall fit. Well, that was good. I appreciate that. To extricate this colony out of these present and really unhappy times.
Yes, the tide is changing.
Indeed.
Indeed, I once fought for the king against the French and Indian. Now I embrace a new authority.
The Concord Convention that met in October of 1774 embraced radical and treacherous measures. They sent representatives home with advice to raise money, men, arms, and ammunition. Towns were advised to raise new militia, elect new officers, loyal only to the authority of the people.
The convention called for 12,000 volunteers from the different towns, 1/3 of them who could be ready on a minute's notice. Towns were counseled to ensure their militia were properly trained, armed, and disciplined to respond to any emergency.
The town drills under the experienced command of my father, now General Whitcomb. There are many other men, like Abraham Holman, who are experienced soldiers from the French and Indian War. And there are young men, like myself, who are joining the militia for the first time. I am a fifer, and my job will be, along with the drummer, to convey my father's military commands on the field. The town supports our training, and on November 7th, town meeting voted to see what method the town will come into to provide arms for such persons as cannot provide for themselves.
Left pace. To the front, march.
They advised each town to set up a committee of safety to enforce boycotts of British goods and to act as a shadow government. These committees became a local police force, enforcing order and hunting down Tories.
On this day of November 7th, 1774, the townsmen voted to choose a committee to inspect and post up all such persons as shall vend or consume the baneful article of East India tea. I am afraid I will find the names of my two brothers on this list, for they are known loyalists who do not recognize the authority of the people. But in my husband's house, there will be no tea.
Continental Congress soon echoed the Provincial Congress. It proposed a union government, the Continental Association, to regulate trade, advocate for rights, and keep order in the colonies since the collapse of the royal authority.
On December 12, 1774, the town was warned to meet and decide if we should follow the advice and resolves of the Continental and Provincial Congresses for maintaining good order. The town has so voted. My dear husband has been named to the town's Committee of Inspection to police our community. I am so proud. What is more, to ensure their loyalty, all men of the town are expected to sign a covenant or agreement to follow their rules of order. I am glad that they do not enforce this on women, for how would I act, divided between my loyalty to my husband and to my king?
Towns were instructed to pay their provincial tax, not to the royal treasurer, but to the person appointed by the authority of the convention alone. This was a bold challenge to the royal authority. Would the towns declare to comply? By early January 1775, Bolton decided.
In 1775, they voted that the money now in the constable's hands that was made payable to Harrison Gray, Esquire, provincial treasurer, will be paid to Henry Gardner, Esquire of Stowe, agreeable to the advice of the provincial congress. Bolton refusing to pay its taxes to the king. They have directed the tax be paid into the hands of the rebel treasurer, Henry Gardner of Stowe. Where will this traitorous behavior end?
Finally, in proof of their deadly serious intentions, the towns gave orders to stockpile arms, ammunition, and medical supplies to prepare for the battle they knew was certain to come.
In town meeting on April 10th, 1775, we voted to purchase 10 guns to be given to those that are not able to purchase the same, to be handed into the hands of our council and to be declared or deposited at their discretion.
And then it happened. April 19th, 1775. The alarm came. 127 men, young and old, responded.
Arise, arise, the militia are required, the regulars are marching.
What? Wait, the militia have been roused. Your father's already left with his minutemen. Come, we must make haste.
I am coming. Farewell, and may God grant us strength against our foes.
This war did not take the people of Bolton by surprise. They had spent the last 10 years debating and asserting their rights, protesting, petitioning, boycotting, assembling, preparing, and resisting.
They had come together to organize a provincial government, a treasury, a communication system, trained militia, arms, even popular police control. They acted together as a town, and they made history.
Many paid a high price for this fight. These are real people, real stories. Stories of the people of our town. They were recorded in our town's records, genealogies, newspapers, and memories. They are stories of everyday people making choices, making plans, and then making history.
Despite his simple manners and humble education, my father was offered a commission in the Continental Army as a general under George Washington. Though he declined on account of his age, I knew then that in this new nation, worth would rest on ability, not aristocratic bearing. I lived the rest of my long life as a Bolton farmer, fathering 15 children, building a turnpike, and serving in town fairs.
On April 19th, my firstborn son Calvin and I respond to the alarm and serve in Cambridge over 2 weeks. And my boys later serve in the Continental Army. My tavern is a busy place in 1776 as the townspeople are getting ready for war and the task of creating a new nation. I myself will not be there to see the new nation, for I died an early death in 1782 at the eve of our victory.
I was expecting my third child with my husband Simon Houghton on the morning of April 19th. My husband serves in the war, but returns home safely to me, and we eventually raise a family of 13 in the new nation. Things do not go so well for my two brothers, both loyalists. Daniel flees to England and loses his property, though he returns many years later. Samuel is prosecuted as a Tory. He eventually flees to the British lines in New York. When he returns after the war, he's in prison for debt. The revolution divided our family.
This uprising also divides my family. My father, the Reverend Goss, an educated man of his time, with conservative views of clerical authority and deference to his betters, never again regains the confidence of his congregation. Disregarding my dignity and rank, I'm persecuted and harassed for my loyalty to my king by the rabble of Bolton. I never return to this town. I flee to Nova Scotia. I never get to see my father. I never get to see my brothers. Despite all of these outrages, my brother Samuel serves in the Continental Army, as well as the 3 husbands of my sisters. My father sadly does not survive this upheaval. He dies in 1780, basically in an era where society no longer is ordered based on rank, social status, education, or clerical authority.
April 19th was a dreaded day for me. My adopted townsfolk going to war with my native land. A year later, my husband chooses to enlist as a chief surgeon in the Continental Army. My own husband fighting against my homeland. He returns to me and our children a dying man and leaves me a widow in this land of war. I gather my children and belongings and return to my native land, leaving Bolton behind forever.
In July of 1776, John Adams ordered the Declaration of Independence be read and affirmed in every meeting house. In Bolton, the people complied, but they had already affirmed these rights in their actions. They had chosen the path of the patriots.